we want to hear from the main discussants. And we will begin by listening to Professor Chief Justice Emeritus Dr. Willy Mutunga to give his thoughts on the discussion and on the piece. Thank you.
I want to talk about the theology of the Constitution, because the Constitution has its own theology. If you look at the preamble, we acknowledge the Almighty God of all creation. And in the preamble also, we are proud of our religious, ethnic, and cultural diversities. When you look at Article 8, it says very clearly that there is no state religion. That's Article 8. You go to Article 27, the article on discrimination. You can't discriminate, the state can't discriminate anyone on the basis of their faith, belief, religion is there. And 32 is actually the article that is the basis of secularism within Article 32, because we have a freedom of thought, of belief, religion, and within this article, okay, I say it's the mother of secularism, because that's where humanism resides. People who say they are agnostic, people who say they are atheists, and of course the religions, and there are many: Hinduism, Baha'i, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the African religion. And there is something called also within that category called the syncretism. Syncretism is people who believe in many religions. People believe in many religions, or people who have been in many denominations. So personally, I consider myself to be in that particular group because of my history, born in a traditional Kamba religion. I saw our elders and parents pouring libations and seeking protection from their ancestors. And that, as I grew up, was my religion. Then I go to school, and schooling, although I went to a district, a secular school, not a religious one, but once you went to school, was religious education. So you had to be part of that. But anyway, in our village, the church called African Inland Church, it was called African Inland Mission before it became church. So they came to the village and they built a church where the shrine was, where people used to go and pray their African gods. And I joined that church for a while, and in one of the sermons, the pastor who was preaching was talking about the evils of snuff, smoking, alcohol, traditional dancing. He said those were satanic. And so he bent down to pick something. I don't know what it was. And then his snuff box just roared. And we all saw it. We all saw it. Then he read after it, stamped on it, and he said, of course in Kikamba, Satan Yaumila Akinau, which means if the devil shows up, you step on. But everybody laughed and he left. Later, I was told he became a witch doctor. But I also left the church that time and went back to traditional religion. Then after a while, when I was secondary school, I joined the Roman Catholic Church for a simple reason that they were allowed out of school on Sundays. But I learned a lot. You know, when I went to Strathmore, I was baptized for the second time, confirmed. Then my first wife was a Muslim, and I studied Islam, and I was persuaded about two things. First, that Jesus is a prophet, is not God. And second thing that I was very, very persuasive was that I can communicate to Allah directly. I don't have to go through interceders. And because my kids were growing and I wanted them to be in a religion, I joined. And when I was in detention, I practiced a lot. And that's when I found very clearly how that religion and where it comes from, like when you do what are called ablutions in a very hot place, before you pray, you cool down. And the story of Muhammad for me, was amazing. But after that, I found that sometimes I have an urge to go to the synagogue, and I go see what happens. I've been to temples as well, and I realized this idea of faith. This is very, very, very personal to people. Sometimes I think I might have veered towards atheism, but I've never stopped thinking that there's a supreme, supreme God. So when Article 32 allows that, I understand, that it's very, very, very important, because the traditional religions were called satanic by the churches. They don't do that anymore. One of the things that I see in churches that tickles me is the dancing and the music. During my time in the church, holding a guitar was satanic. So the dances are in basically because we want also young people to come and listen to the word of God. And when you actually wade into these other religions, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain. Yeah, I remember talking to one Muslim cleric, after my conversion, and he told me I wasn't going to be a Muslim, because to be a Muslim you have to be born, a Muslim. And even within Islam, you're all familiar with various sects. The battles over, the sighting of the moon. There are these battles between Sunnis, Ahmadiyya, and Shia. And that's why the vision of the Constitution of allowing us to build a democratic secular state and society. It's very, very, very important, where tolerance is important. You respect other, people's faith, because, there are countries where if Harrison Mumia lived there and said, I'm an atheist, you'll probably be killed. And we have all seen cases where faith is so important to people that you cannot tell jokes about it. So respecting the other person's faith is what our Constitution agrees that freedom of religion, opinion, and belief is fundamental. And the reason why it does that is because there's a history of religious strife. People fighting over those issues, killing each other. You look at the history of the Sunnis and the Shia. If you read the books, very, 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 very bloody. And it's because of the interpretation. So the Constitution, our Constitution, and I haven't seen any other Constitution that has that vision, a vision of let's dialogue, let's respect each other's religion, okay? If you find people, wearing a monkey skin and facing Mount Kenya and saying, thy, don't say there goes the devil, because they have their own African God. But what I see, the vision is not a legal vision. Okay, it's not this vision of a secular state. It's based on humanity. It's our humanity that is the basis of it. It's not the aspects of where you go to church and so forth. It's to treat the other human being as a human being, and what they believe in needs to be respected. And the last thing I say on this issue, just to reinforce what I was saying, is to ask you, when you read Professor Ambani's book, and when you listen to Reverend Mutuku in his sermons, take time and look at a small book called God is Not a Christian, and other provocations. India gives us the example of that kind of thing. When you start saying this religion is more superior than the other, the killings that go on even under the new fascist fellow called Modi, it's going on because of that issue. And as we discuss our Constitution, we should look around the world and see people who don't have the same vision are facing a problem. Desmond Tutu also, in his writings, visits the issue that we are now discussing in this country, the issue of, gay rights, and it says that the God he worships is not homophobic. South Africans have, gone ahead with it. And when you read the Abbey Sachs, he makes the same point of saying, when you're debating this issue, the issue of faith is very personal to people. So you have to be careful how you talk about it, okay? And for courts to decide those kind of issues, courts want to show that they are giving that community justice, and they are also giving justice, to the others. It's a very difficult, as a situation. But if we come from the basis of humanity, the basis of flexibility, listening to people. You find we'll have a dialogue. We'll find a dialogue about it. First of all, now even the churches themselves are not speaking with one voice. I was telling the provost yesterday that these issues are very personal. I have the son of my nephew who is gay, okay? And so for me, it's personal. If somebody starts saying, kill them, don't pay fees, kick them out of homes, and so forth. So let's look at the theology of the Constitution, which is pegged on humanity, reasoning together, tolerance, respecting people's beliefs, and not basically saying your belief is is more superior and so forth. And that's for me, when you look at the prophets, whether it's Jesus or whether it's Muhammad and many others, it's their humanity that we focus on. Because if we believe that we are all created in the image of God, then notwithstanding our differences, we cannot lose humanity. Thank you very much.
Reverend Mutuku, I think this is the moment we would like to hear your reactions and your views, maybe not so much from a legalistic point of view, but from a man of the cloth and as a scholar in religious studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mutunga, for bringing out some important aspects that are very enlightening. I think from your legal expertise and experience for many years, I had the privilege of growing in Ambani, but I struggled to understand how the olden days people managed, because I'm in the generation where we were not able to find what you call them, the shrines. Some of us were just being taught because we found Christianity displaced those in a particular way, but then without constructively engaging with the people to know how the replacement. I'm also very impressed by a proposal of my brother, because I'm a theologian of culture myself. I'm pursuing that direction in my PhD, and I'm very interested in studying a bit about some of the potential hints culture can provide in our understanding of God. While we know revelation is core in scripture, but are there things within our own selves that can provide direction? Let me propose for these conversations to happen. I think there are three things I'm finding that are important. One is what I call the listening approach, that I think sometimes tends to lack in many of us. And probably we do not have the time to say why we don't listen. Maybe the way we have been formatted in our religious traditional orientations, we were trained. I don't know how many of you grew up in a community like me where we were trained the escapist approach. If you see a Jehovah's Witness person coming with the pamphlets, run away or close the door. Some of us grew up in a setup where we were trained to escape and avoid conversation. So one of the biggest things I think that I'm learning, and that as I'm hearing from this conversation, is we must develop the heart of listening to each other. And that listening may involve a lot of patience, a lot of tolerance, a lot of understanding, raising concerns to understand where you are coming from and such. The second thing that I would propose in this conversation would be what I call the appreciative approach, where you appreciate others' matter, where you appreciate they have a point, they have an idea they are producing, and there's something that they are coming up. That's what I'm hearing from the conversation. We have students, as you can see already, we have indications, because religion has also framed us in a way that even our clothing tell who you are. And sometimes we even judge others based on what we see from out right away. If my sister has a job, then I'm like, I know what she does. I know what she believes in. I know where she's going. I think we need to, if Kenya and Africa is going to have a better religious, what we call state-religion relationships, the beginning point of those conversations, we must even revisit how those conversations happen by taking an appreciative approach, that others have something they are contributing and making contribution. The third one is, I think we need to have a language of conversation. I think some of the languages, like I've heard from Professor Mutunga and for even my brother, sometimes we bring language biases when we begin to speak. Like I come in here and begin with praise the Lord. I have no problem with the language we use, but I think the language must not be discriminative from the word. It must be one that allows people to feel they have a space and a moment, a chance to be listened to. So those three are important for me as I'm listening to Professor Ambani, as I'm listening to what even this theology of our constitution. I think the problem is not the constitution, neither the theology in the constitution. I think the problem is we have been cultured to not listen, not to appreciate, and not to have a language. We are very condemning. I recently checked when the issue of the LGBTs came. I saw clips that are running from different quarters of religions, some of them cursing, some of them even calling people names, some of them using very vulgar language to members of their congregation, and even saying things that I thought, we have an issue at hand, but we need a conversation. Even from the pulpits, we need a conversation that people can feel, okay, you are giving me space to offer my ideas. But there's something else I also think we need to be aware of, and that is the script. All religious orientation, traditions, all that have the script. And the challenge is for Bible, the Christians use the Bible, Islam use the Quran, Hindus use the Vedas, and we have so many. Even ATR, when we did not have a written, we had an oral available scripts, which were carried orally. But my problem is the word interpretation. How do we interpret those particular documents that we have? Because the interpretation then produces the kind of beliefs and the practices that we have. And that's the question I think Lorraine will bear with me. I posed to another conversation of lawyers that we probably, when we're talking about the faith for heart, I was talking about the need for proper hermeneutics. Even within the circles of Muslim and even Christians, what is guiding our interpretation of the scripts that we are reading that guide our religious orientation? So I think those, because I find most of the religions operate under three: either they have a script or they are making some claims. Even those claims need to be exegeted. They need to be examined. On what basis and on what grounds can we look at those claims? And then there's another word there. Most of the religions have what we call traditions and customs. You stand, you kneel, you shut your eyes. We have all these things coming up. I have no problem with that. But I think, again, there is so much of traditions that are not being interrogated by anybody before we even go. So you can see we have our inner trouble before we go to the public space. The conversation table will be very difficult, because if you are coming with the faulty interpretations, then it might be difficult. And that's why Professor Mutunga says, even as Christians, the church is speaking from different voices. Some of them are using different hermeneutics. And that is a challenge. I think, Professor Ambani, we may want to be asking going forward, even with the liberties, how will we achieve the liberties without a proper interpretation of what we are looking at? And then I think I would encourage, of course, that during the conversations for the Christian understanding, let me just make an observation. I was just thinking through that this issue of state religion is not an issue of yesterday. It's not an issue that is just being brought by technology. It's a thing which is, we call it, is an ancient phenomenon. Ancient in terms, if you are from the understanding scripture, when God did the creation, the next thing he does, and the people miss out on that in Genesis, is that he participates, he gives man the mandate to learn a state, to government, the human government, but God becomes a partaker. He visits man on a regular basis until you get to chapter 3, where now man disobeys God, and the government of man has an issue with the religion, because God no longer has space in Adam and Eve, and they are pushing God out. And then we can look through as we proceed in this conversation, and I will show you, many of you may not have thought, the battle between Cain and his brother Abel was a religious battle, because somebody had already done something to appease God, and the other was jealous of the same. Some of you may not know, but the Tower of Babel was a religious battle. Men wanted to access this God in a unique way and share space with him in understanding. You may move further and you get more examples in scripture that show you that religion-state debate is not a yesterday's issue. It is as ancient as man was created. And religion and state, in God's dream and vision, they were supposed to be coexisting together, serving as one. But I will be talking about this maybe later, that the theology of fall brings in a question of how we have come the far we are. Let me close by making a personal pastoral statement on the debate the Chief Justice commended. I believe the conversation about LGBTQs is going to be with us. It's not going anywhere. A reactionary approach will not give us direction. I have a very strong Christian inclination that we need theology of identity, a theology of humanity, a theology of creation, and a theology of sexuality. Unless we get back and come up with a theology of humanity. What does it mean to be human and created in the image of God? What does it mean to be male and female? If we can have a theology, a proper theology grounded on that, that might take us further. What about sexuality, a theology of sexuality? Who are we in terms of identity, a theology of identity? I guess from my understanding, I will be inviting Christians and theologians, and even across all of us, our conversation should start with establishing a theology that will give a framework of thinking over some of these things. For now, my brother, Professor Ambani, I think your proposal is great. I'm putting input in that we can enrich it by having a framework that guides us. Thank you.
Is it right for the state to mediate religious practice, or is this a vagary that has been formed by the unnecessary introduction of religion into state practice? Maybe we can begin with Professor Ambani.
Be that as it may, I think that's a very good question. And I'm happy you refer to, say, the Carmelites. We're talking about Turkey. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the basic history of Turkey. Borderline Europe, borderline the Arabs. They're trying to democratize, to develop. I'm using quotes here as the Western world. They think Islam is not well suited for that purpose. At least Islam, as is known, is too radical for Westernization, too radical for development. So the government comes in to create. In fact, I think the original idea was to kill this thing called Islam and create a secular culture. But then they get confronted with serious problems, like when the sheikhs are not there, people die. Who buries them? And the state has to worry about that also. And then many people will not be buried without a spiritual figure. Like I wouldn't want to be buried, to be just put in a hole. That is scary. I don't know whether you've thought about your death, but I want some meditation, isn't it? Yeah, some meditation before I can be. A professor is interred, isn't it? But the others are buried, as Professor Mugai would tell us. So the state then is interested in religion, I think, and you can't run away from that. And the state finds that it has to work with religion, on the side, in the front, behind, religion is around it. And I think then the state must begin that conversation. How do we engage with religion? And how this happens has to also be alive to the history. Turkey has a unique history. We have a unique history, for example, of Kurdish courts at the coastal strip. We can't run away from that. It's part of the negotiations that we had towards independence. So as the state does these negotiations, I think what I said earlier still stands. It has to listen. And I like what Reverend said. Listening is part of it, conversation. Negotiation is part of it. Concessions are part of it. Accommodation. And I come back to the public reason. Is it possible that the state can mediate in a neutral way? Okay. Still working with religion, but in a neutral way. So the state finds, for instance, in Kenya, that it can't resolve certain disputes without engaging the Qadis. That's fact. The state finds that certain marriages, I could give my own illustration, I wouldn't marry without going to church. Okay. So I have to, the state has to allow registrars of marriages, isn't it? Okay, that are Christians, reverends. But in that process of working with the religion, I think the state has to use the public reason, approach the issue in neutral terms. Reason, okay, this is how we're going to engage. This is how we're not going to engage. But also, while being accommodative, all the things that the Reverend talked about. I think that's what I would say overall. But I also want to say that states can author religion. In fact, states author religion. And we had that conversation when I had this debate with Kanjama, I think you remember, and Reverend was there as well. The states can actually author their own religion or modify existing religion or even cultures and civilizations. If you've been on an international forum, you'll notice that people from a particular country begin to behave in a certain way. And sometimes even start having a certain version of religion. That's the work of the state. But I think we also say that religion also shapes the state. And I think we recognize the work of religious leaders in the independence movement in Kenya, but also in the multi-party reforms movement. There's Mutukus of this world in South Africa, but in Kenya, Reverend Timothy Njoya, for example, Reverend Munge, and all that. They played a part in our liberation. So religion and state have that kind of incestuous relationship. But all I would insist is that as that happens, the three things we said in Charles Taylor and the idea of public reason should be part of it, but most seriously, neutral. And I think that could answer what you asked also about Willy's article. The state has Qadis courts, yes. Can we negotiate whether women can be Qadis? Because for the state, gender equality is important, I think, the theology of the state. But you might find Muslims have a variety of interpretations. And if you've read Willy's article in the Star, he refers to Shia and Sunni having different interpretations. There are those who accept women Qadis, there are those who don't. Can we negotiate as a state? Okay, can this art of conversation go on at that level? And I think I'm really sold to this concept. Okay. Thank you.
I think fundamentally we also have to demystify what the state is, because I think that's important. The state is not neutral. A state is enslaved by powerful economic, social, and political forces, right? And even those struggles that we see, the tensions between the state and religion, are about politics. Because there's no presidential candidate in Kenya who can actually tax churches and get away with it. Okay, they haven't done that. And you remember when Githu raised that issue, he thought it was a very fair issue that there should be taxation. The answer came from State House. Okay, a political answer, because he was giving a legal answer, but the political answer he got from Uhuru was shut up. Okay, they might find themselves dealing with uprising, and they might actually be, removed from, from power. That's why in the Kenyan situation, you see them tracking to churches and, giving money, because it's fundamentally, political. But the mediation, and I go to the question of women Qadis, all right? Where the Sunnis say, no, it can't happen. The Shia say, we have no problem. And we ask them to bring in the I think the Ismailis probably don't have the problem, and the Boras don't have a problem. And we ask them, why don't you talk to each other and take a position on this issue? Because there is a conflict under Article 27, when the JSC will interview a woman who qualifies to be Qadi. How are they going to justify not hiring that woman if she qualifies? Okay, and you see the tension there. And you also see the tension of religion, because the moment JSC is seen to have Christians, all right, then another tension comes out of that decision. And that's why when constitutions are negotiated and the people come to a consensus, then that leadership actually comes from the people and not, from the state, because the state is by nature captured, and it tends to actually not be, the sovereign power, of the people. And that issue of Qadi courts actually is not now the main issue. The main issue in some places like America is there was this woman who in a university, a Muslim woman, who led prayers on Friday. Okay, and it was revolutionary in the sense that hadn't been had before. And I'm sure if that woman was in Saudi Arabia or the Sunni nations, she would have been killed, because that's in Islam that has never, has never even, been raised. But the beauty of those debates is that we interrogate what Reverend Mutuku was calling the text, okay? And we continue interpreting them, okay? Because when the issue of the man leading prayers, the imams being, being men, okay? And there are some mosques, like the one I go to, Medina, women don't sit in the main mosque. There's a separate place where they go and sit. If you go to a synagogue, they sit together, but they have their own part and so forth. Just like the African Inland Mission, when I went to that church, women sat on one side and the men, on the other. And if you asked, they said, "Oh, we if we sit them together, the devil is among us, and we don't want to have that kind of thing." So there's a history of it, and that's why I agree with the Reverend Mutuku about this theology of humanity. Okay, because it's so fundamental that if we lose that, in the arguments, it means we always have conflicts. Qadi courts, as you and I know, all right, they deal with divorce, they deal with succession and maintenance. Men who divorce their wives, Muslim men who divorce their wives, they don't go to the Qadi courts, you know that. They don't. In fact, in many cases, if you want to divorce your wife and you are Muslim, you can even take that divorce to the brother or the father. Or you just write a note.
Talak.
Yeah, talak. Mekutalaki. And if it comes to me as the brother of your wife, I'm the one who tells her wajua umeachwa. So, and let's go, let's go. So it's the cathedicals are frequented by women, and to basically say that you can't have, a women caddies, it's something that has to be discussed. But I also wanted to say that when we had that issue in the judiciary, I talked to a lot of Muslim advocates who I thought, could be caddies, and they wouldn't accept.
Women.
It's a matter of faith. They said, this is a hot potato. We don't want, you don't want to go there. So there is also the issue of faith of a woman, a Muslim woman who believes that women should not be caddies, as a matter of interpreting, the scriptures and so forth. So this idea of other theologies that Reverend Mutuku is talking about, I think is a great idea. But as he says, if we are dogmatic about our beliefs, it won't move. It won't move. Me, I thought the having women caddies, since they function in Indonesia, Malaysia, Sudan, Pakistan, and all these are Sunni nations, that it could be tried. But the chief Qadi didn't convene even a single meeting to discuss that issue with various sects of Islam, because he knew that was a grenade with a pin off. So until he retired, he never talked about the issue. So there could be cases where not the state, but I think, the people themselves, if we are saying in Article 1 that sovereign power rests in the people, then we have to actually encourage that people-to-people, discussions. Because the leadership, even the leadership of SUPKEM, when they came to talk to me about women caddies, they thought we had hired one, okay? And they intimidated me. They said, you can have a fatwa. And so, anyway, that's a discussion for another day when I asked them, why don't you want women to be caddies? And the reasons were not, were reasons again of faith, all right? And to move people out of an argument based of faith is only going to be settled if we get something broader than the theology of sexuality, theology of humanity. Because you've gotten out of the scriptures, you're doing something, external. And I think in Turkey and other places, it was just politics. Even when they were looking for that cleric after the coup d'etat, the guy who had these schools called light academies in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
These are political struggles dressed as, religious, struggles. And in those countries, the religious leaders are very, very powerful. They have a following. And I think that that following also has to be when we start talking about theology of humanity. We want when the reverends stand on that pulpit to allow questions to be asked. I have never gone to a church where anybody puts up their hand to say, I have a different view, Reverend. Can we discuss this? So I think democratizing this discussion as well, where particularly young people can ask questions and, have a debate. You need a new crop of, progressive reverends who are not challenged, and they've read the scriptures and they can have a discussion. But if you have there are some who are like headmasters, once they are there, the purport, you can't actually, stop it. And it's a good question in the sense that is a reality. The moment JSC, and I think they will one of these days if they get a Muslim woman who qualifies, and Article 27, they will appoint that woman. And hell breaks loose. Okay? So that's why I went the route of talking to, to the groups, because they didn't have a
unified voice,
unanimous position. So talk about it. Don't come later and say, the Christians have imposed, because it's not the Christians, it's the Constitution. And for Muslims, of course, they have to deal with that question very carefully because they are in the Constitution.
So if I was to give you strictly legal advice, I would tell you that the Constitution talks about religious freedom. Nobody should compel you to enter any religious building. That's a very clear constitutional provision that any university with a public charter like ours should observe. But that is to be very narrow-minded, I think, if you asked me. And I've spent time with the old universities, for example, Oxford. I've done a lot of work there with academics there and even lived there for some time. And they have odd traditions, odd. One of the traditions there is that there's a college that took land from the other, okay? They build on another's land. Oxford is run through colleges. So on that day, I think it was 1500 and something, or 1600 that happened. But on that day when the land was taken, they fight. The students from this college start beating students from the other college, and they do it until now. That is Oxford theology, isn't it? There's also a day where they sing, isn't it? They sing certain kind of songs, and there's a platform where the choir stands and everybody sings, and it's a tradition started by the students' culture of that institution. So institutions have a culture. That's what the Reverend was saying, and it's good to start understanding that that is the culture of the institution you are in. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. A proper lawyer, I think, educated in broader consensus should take the issue of accommodation more seriously. Listening, I liked what Reverend was saying. Listen, engage. Why don't you see what, just get in, like Chief Justice said, get into a synagogue, get into AIC. I'm not a member of AIC myself, but anytime I'm around on Wednesday and I have I just get into the chapel and listen to preachings, fantastic preachings, and I learn a lot there. It also shows you that the world is not what you want. And I think of a lot of what we are preaching as constitutional theology is not true. And I've taken time to talk to my students, those that are close, about a lot of lies being peddled by the fast globalizing world, the secular world. For example, freedom, for example, autonomy, choice. Those words don't exist in the real world. Good that you begin getting that. So for example, I didn't choose my dad. I didn't choose my mother. I didn't choose my sister. I don't even think anyone chooses their wife or husband. I don't think we choose. Or you think you choose those ones? I don't think I chose my wife. I found myself in that situation and I'm not regretting. I like it. So this is what I mean. Unless you guys think you can date online, you'll only date a person from among the pool that is available, isn't it? Around you that accepts your offer, isn't it? No? There's no way the daughter of Bill Gates was going to get married to me. I had no access to Bill Gates, for example. There had to be someone around me, isn't it? Yeah. So the idea of choice that has come into your head is a very legalistic and secular globalization kind of enlightened, post-enlightenment kind of thinking that is so narrow. And sometimes we live with what we have. We don't have time, but you'll also find yourself say, as Dina, I have to teach you about cultures. I found myself in these situations, in cultures that I didn't approve of, where people are eating cats, cat meat, snakes. And I'm living there for 6 months. What do you do? Okay. I went hungry in West Africa for a month, only having cocoa and what? And cassava. Couldn't eat anything else, snails and all that, until I learned to just change and say, okay, let me just do what the Romans are doing. And nowadays I eat everything, crocodiles, everything. I go to a new society, I just eat what they're eating and socialize and enjoy, It's also, I think that's what I'm saying, accommodation, listening, and just get to the chapel. You could be a Muslim, get in. You don't have to convert if you don't like what Mutuku is saying. You don't have to, when he asks for an altar call, you don't have to go, but you can listen to what they're preaching. And principally, the Christian faith is, the big books are just the same books in the Quran. Anyway, let me not take that time.
Professor Mutunga.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Mutunga, the two questions, the counter-majoritarian difficulty by Adeline, and the question on constitutional schism, the contradictions within the Constitution when it comes to the issue of religion that was issued by Zitki Segire. So maybe you can address those two. The first one was the counter-majoritarian difficulty on the issue of sexual orientation, the declaration by a judge, an elected judge, that tends to rule over the country. So I think Adeline had asked whether judges should have that kind of power.
So where does the the powers of judges come from? They come from various articles in the Constitution. But the important thing is to know that the sovereign judges are the people. Okay, because if sovereign power resides in us, and we delegate to the judges. Okay, we delegate to the executive, to the institutions. So at abstract level, you could actually say what Underlane is saying, that where did you get that power from? To subvert, my sovereign power. All right, and it's a very interesting argument, but in the case of Kenya, for example, we haven't even discussed what that means, that direct exercise of sovereign power. We haven't. We deal with it from the margins. When we talk about impeachment, we talk about recourse, and so forth. So it's too abstract, right? It's too abstract as we talk about it, because if you wanted an opinion on it, a judge would say, all right, have you read the provisions,
Article 159.
Yes, that give us, this power, to decide. And the judges even have sometimes the guts to say, we have the right to err. You have heard that, in deciding, we've got, we can make, we can, make mistakes. But and they can also tell you, Adeline, that, well, if you thought that our law was abused, you invoke 168, go to the JSC and get us removed. You have a window of opportunity there where you can say, and there are reasons given in 168. You can say this judge is lazy, should be removed. This judge is incompetent. Before even you get to the juicy aspects of corruption, there are misconducts. It could be sexual harassment, it could be, whatever. But I wanted to say on that particular question is, people should study the history of constitution making and actually drafting. The book published by Githo and published by Kabarak University Press tells a story of even the drafters coming with the drafts from elsewhere, okay? They have listened to the people, but because they have a particular position, they come up with a draft. A draft, is accepted. So I talked, and I will disclose this. I talked to Chaloka, who was a commissioner, Professor Chaloka Mbeyani, from Zambia, right? He told me, and this is very, very important, that although Kenyans were making a constitution, they had serious divisions, all right? Very serious, fundamental divisions. And so they asked themselves, how do we deal with this? And they basically said, we give this to the judiciary, to have a final view of it and a judgment of it. And then when you look at the structure of the constitution, it's very conflictual. You can get one article that is subverted by another article, right? And that's why they came up with the preamble and also Article 10, so that if there are conflicts, then you can harmonize them, by going to the, to the broader principles. But they also knew that they were dealing with a situation where they couldn't, come up with definite phrasing that was conclusive. Even if you look at Article 45 about safe-sex marriage, you can come up with 100 interpretations of what that section, that article says. And the debate about sex, including sexual orientation, has just come to the Supreme Court now, but it was debated, a long time ago. So I think that the Constitution allows us to keep on thinking. Look at where the weaknesses are, and we have these debates, and we carry on. It's something that your generations will have to to deal with. In my view, the repugnant clause has a history. I don't even know why it was put in 159. It's a shame it's there, because the repugnant clause, the morality and justice that we are talking about, we were talking about British immorality and injustice. Because all they did, using, if they are customary laws, you remember, where they would be saying they are repugnant to justice and morality, subversion of our cultures, subversions of our freedom, on the basis of Victorian values, okay, of the day. But when I was talking to the students the other day, I said, in my view, the morality that we are talking about is a morality and justice of the Constitution, as you have said, and that's what we have to look at, and the judges are bound by that theory of interpreting the Constitution. They look at various articles of the Constitution on the issue, and come out with a decision. So 159, where Melissa is quoting, it's very specific. If you look at it, it's specific about traditional resolution, dispute resolutions. That's where it's put. And I'm talking about the morality of the Constitution and also the Constitution in itself, because there are elders like Juri Njeke, who basically say they represent young women and the entire community. And the Constitution says otherwise, right? So it's in a different, a different context. But that morality, that justice that we're seeking has to be embedded in the Constitution. It might be elusive. The other thing I wanted to say, people say that judges speak through their judgments, but that's not true. Judges have their own politics, their own biases, and when you look at the oath of office, it tries to deal with that, right? Prejudices, ill will, this, and the other. So, so the role of judges, as we see it, it's also controlled, right? It's not, they are given certain power, yes, but it's true, we should be, aware of the biases, and some are perceived. Like if you are Chief Justice and you are asked to set up a bench of 5 or 7 or 3, and then you are stupid enough to forget that the dispute is between a Luo and a Kikuyu, and then you bring a bench of 3 Luos. Okay? All I'm saying is that there is some judicial wisdom and the politics that is in the Constitution, that you have to know. We divided on the basis of ethnicity, so you are not going to get that particular person to feel that there was justice, when actually the people from the particular community were, the only one, deciding. Yeah, that's and for Jeff Harrison, let me answer him because I think he asked his question. Yeah, all I can say, Jeff, is I think you misinterpreted what I was saying. If you are in my class, I will ask you whether you are listening or you are. But I don't want to bully you. But to say, actually, freedom of religion or secularism is. Secularism, yes, define it properly. State should not be involved in, in religion, which is section 8, and you find that in all political formations, you read the communists, for example. They always say, there's that, freedom of the association. And I think Marx is quoted wrongly because on the issue of religion being the opium of the people. But he goes on to talk about that freedom being left to the citizens themselves and the state, not imposing it. And I thought 32 for me, as I said, Article 32 for me is the one that is the mother of secularism, and the mother of coexistence, because everybody's hand is being told you have freedom of belief, conscience, opinion, and it's there. And I think that's what I was saying as we move to the religious theology of humanity. That's how, that is what we have on the ground. And if we don't sort it out, we will be thinking that these tribal or ethnic clashes child games, because this the religious one would be very, very explosive.
If, for example, you have a nunnery, a convent, okay, and you go to court and say it doesn't meet the 2/3 gender rule. Are you guys familiar with a convent? Convent is for nuns, isn't it? Nuns are women, isn't it? Or you're a Catholic and you want to celebrate Mass as a woman. In Catholic Church, women don't celebrate Mass. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And you want to use constitutional principles. I think you're out of place. Yet church is a public place, it's a public space in many ways. The church runs... Senior counsel, I'm scared. If he agrees with you, Senior counsel, yeah. So you don't want to go and celebrate Mass as a female priest. At that point, I think you should thank God for Martin Luther, isn't it? And start your own version of independent Catholic church movement, where you can celebrate church Mass as a woman. So what I'm saying is that you must also have a culture of tolerance, understanding, and Reverend already gave the framework of even that conversation. I gave also the contours and Chief Justice as well of that conversation. Let's be a bit tolerant. Let's give, let's take. Let's give concessions and engage in sober conversations. Something else Reverend said that could answer even the second question. Even amongst us Christians, there are divergence of opinion. And that's why he talked about text, the claims made in religious terms, and also the traditions of religion. There are differences on those. And then Chief Justice referred, for example, to the Catholic Pope. And from the theology I understand, Catholic Church, you don't contradict the Pope. But Bishop Muheria has contradicted the Pope publicly. So it means that even in the Catholic Church, there are different understandings of what should happen. In the Anglican Church, they have in fact gone as ahead. The African versions, the Uganda and Kenya, they're actually threatening to split completely now, to sever themselves from the mother church, which means they also have fundamental misunderstandings on this issue. And then I think what Reverend was saying, before you agree internally and have one voice, why are you coming to bother outsiders? Okay? It's important to have internal conversations, then engage also with external actors. And like I said, there are rules for this. Come neutrally. Let's engage. Let's give and take. Okay? Like come to Kabarak, understanding that it's a trust, isn't it? Founded by Mzee, and Christian principles were part of the founding ideals. That's really what I'm talking about. Culture of tolerance and understanding. I don't know if that helps Shikori not to rush to the VC tomorrow or to the chaplain to register an organization. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Before you do the last question, I want to take some moderator discretion and invite honored member of our law school, Mr. Ongoya.
You know, those of us who are not gifted in the art of speaking always say, all I had to say has already been said. So ideally, that's what I would have said, having listened to these very eminent panelists. I think that even the value called tolerance is a beautiful value on the face of it, but we need to interrogate the normative content of tolerance. The normative, what does it entail? If, and Chief Justice Mutunga, I was posing these questions to my junior colleagues here. If I walked into a mosque on a Friday and I find them leaving shoes outside, it just makes sense that I leave my shoes outside and walk in with them. To insist that I am expressing myself by walking with my shoes into the mosque, ni uchokozi. It's not expression. It's important for us to understand that there is protected expression and unprotected expression. If while inside there, when we were young and poor in the village, we used to carry githeri in our pockets in class. As the teacher teaches, we would periodically pinch some githeri and eat and continue listening to the chika or guavas. If this time around I pull out some pork from my pocket and chew, there is no expression there, ni uchokozi. Let's be truthful to each other. So that the word tolerance, I will not ask them to tolerate me. They may actually evict me forcefully from that space. And I think the reaction to my eviction from that space must be understood. That's only so far. Reverend Mutuku has spoken about tolerance, and Professor Ambani has spoken about something called neutral language. In my jurisprudence classes, I tell my students that the words neutral and objective are exaggerated words. They actually don't exist in reality. In fact, the few examples he gave while standing on the podium, there were not neutral words. In a contest between secularism and religion, there were words on the side of secularism in that contest. So they're not a level playing ground. They're not somewhere in the middle. There was a religious versus secularism contest. But all the examples he gave were from the secularism side of the conversation. So it tells you, and I have no doubt that those words come across as neutral, but when you interrogate them further, you discover that depending on the conversation, they actually are not value neutral. And that's just the politics of knowledge. When I teach epistemology in legal theory, I insist on my students that knowledge is political. And that if you don't create ideas, and I talk to them as African students, that if you don't create ideas of your own as a people, you will be dominated. So that in a marketplace of ideas, there must be your ideas competing against other people's ideas. If I went to Reverend Mutuku and told him, be tolerant and celebrate my gay union to so-and-so, be tolerant and do that. And he answers back, no, you know, I'm a reverend, and this is sinful. You can't fault him for using the word sin and tell him to look for a more neutral word. He's entitled to conscience. His conscience tells him, no, I may be tolerant to an extent. That if you went elsewhere and celebrated, I may not comment on your action. But if you came to me, it is so conflicting with my fundamental doctrine as a Christian clergy, and that it is sinful. That word is appropriate in his response. He needs not look for any other neutral word. So I think the conversation must take on board all these things. And I think the things Professor Mutunga alluded to also just confirms my fears. Society will move at an evolutionary phase, not at a revolutionary phase. He pointed out himself as Chief Justice, himself as Chair of the Judicial Service Commission, the appointing authority for Qadis, asking female lawyers who are Muslims, will you consider? They themselves. If he appointed one, he would think he's doing a favor to Muslim women. He would think he's doing justice to Muslim women. He would think he's doing justice to the Constitution in terms of it confers guarantees to Muslim women and Article 27. But they themselves say, no. It hits at my own faith as a Muslim woman so hard that when a Chief Justice goes low in your intention to do good, to do justice. Society will move like that. I consider the present LGBT debate in that context. Some of the harsh criticisms against the Supreme Court, I understand them in that context. Society will absorb these shocks slowly. If you tell society to absorb these shocks abruptly, that's also being unjust in your expectations of society. And that's all.
Reverend Mutuku, what is your advice to this generation on matters religion? Maybe you can wrap up for us this period by giving some words, some nuggets of wisdom.
Thank you. I think there is so much that we can talk about. First, every time I stand before you and when I look at you, I'm always conscious about the diversity that sits before myself. And I know you process what you hear from our pulpits from different contexts, from different setups. I was looking at some of the aspects that Professor Ambani mentioned in the article regarding how religion can help in matters of regulating what she talked about, morality and other focuses. I think for today, what I would like to send as a parting statement is religion is a reality. That is something we can never push away, whatever shape it takes. I would like to illustrate with a story in the book of Judges. I'm not going to read the story, but there was a time when Gideon, those of you who have read about Gideon, had interrupted a religious inclination of his family. And at some point, the crowd decided to react religiously by attacking him. And in the process, his father was also pulled into the religious confusion, and he was asked, so what do you say about your son? Can you pull him out for us to even punish him? I think I would like to leave this statement with you. In Judges chapter 6, verse 31, there's a statement the father of Gideon gave to the community, which was interesting. When they became to him hostile, demanding they get Gideon, because Gideon had broken down all the religious structures and the objects they had, and they came in the morning like, you've disrupted everything. The father says this to them, verse 31. But Joash replied to the hostile crowd around him, are you going to plead Baal's cause? Are you trying to save him? That is your God. Who fights for him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal is God, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar. And I took something very interesting with this gentleman. He may not be spoken about in scripture, but he had a very open understanding of religion. That the object, the God that is being worshipped, cannot survive by being defended by ideas and notions coming from people. And he said to them, give it time. If Baal is God, he will lay the case before. I will say to you, there's going to be a lot of conversation whether we push religion out or in. But if it is about the maker of heaven and earth, it will survive. It will survive because the owner is in charge. So let me ask you, don't give up on religion, whatever you're involved in. Don't give up because of a failure of another person who failed, or a religious failure. I see people moving to churches and fighting issues because this has failed. That's okay, it's good to explore. But I love Joash's way of thinking. If God is God, he does not need Kenyans to defend him. Let me ask you a question. What makes you a female? What makes me a male? Why is it that there is some difference between you and my sister here, even within the chest, within the makeups? What is happening in our world today? That's why I said, if we can respond to a theology of identity and humanity, we might get our religion moving right. To you, religion is not an enemy to you. I think there's a voice there saying it's an enemy. It only becomes an enemy when it stops resonating with the aspects of reasoning, with the aspects of faith, with aspects that are accommodative in terms of listening and having a conversation. If Baal is God, he will defend himself. This case, I would say, even regarding those of you wondering, does religion matter to me? Take a time and reflect. Your journey that you have come, the things that have happened in your life, and where you're headed. One of the things that I found very interesting is every time I'm called in the hospital at the last minute, even people who, for some reasons, don't realize there's a God out there, they will tell you, Pastor, just say a prayer. Link me with this supreme being. I'm imagining I'm going to meet him somewhere after here. And so that humbles me. So yes, this has been an amazing conversation, but the most important thing is be not just a blind follower. You've seen recently people lifting up the phone and they're commanding airwaves to release money to your phone, creating a culture of laziness and shortcuts. You have to examine your religious inclination. You don't have to be held there because your parents were there. You see, that's the challenge we have. You have to be there because you understand why you are there. If Baal is God, he will defend himself. Thank you.
I'll just finish with those two statements. That if God is God, he will defend himself. And the statement that was given to Kisegire, that contradictions in the Constitution reflect contradictions in society. And we shall continue having these conversations, and society will continue mediating its own evolution as opposed to the state mediating its own, the evolution of society. Thank you. Prof. Reverend Mutuku, would you like to give the closing prayer?